Support this podcast via our Patreon and get more writerly goodness. Visit patreon.com/nanocast to join up.
Welcome to NaNoWriMo Every Month. My name is J. Daniel Sawyer. I'm the author of some 20 books, 34 short stories, and numerous articles and other things, and I am your guide on this journey to use NaNoWriMo to level up to professional output levels. Welcome to The Questions, Day 6. This is going to be the first of 2 days where we talk about different aspects of editing and not over-editing. I can't say I'm surprised, but this has proved to be sort of the most controversial bit of advice that I gave out on the whole show, and it's because it goes against a lot of what we are taught in school and what we learn about writing through the popular press, which is dominated by screenwriters, and screenwriting does require extensive rewrites and editing because of the strictures and demands of the format and the structure of the industry. But this podcast is about novel writing, and that's a whole different thing. So Melissa writes in, Prose. I want sparkle and a voice that grabs you, but how do I do that without the over-editing? I have my list of things to do when I edit. POV staying constant, dialogue sounds like the characters, no adverbs, show don't tell, specific details, remember contractions in the dialogue. But with that, I feel like I hate it by the time I'm done. Well, Melissa, I can't say as I blame you. If I was doing all of that, I would hate it by the time I was done too. Writing is like driving a stick shift. Writing is like learning to drive in a car with a manual transmission. Not only do you have to worry about traffic and acceleration and braking and the rules of the road and how to operate the windshield wipers and when to turn the lights on and when to use the blinkers, but you also have to manage the torque distribution to the rear wheels using an extra pedal and a stick in the middle of the console. And every time you get beyond the power band, you have to either move up or down a gear, and that involves a complicated set of macro movements with your body, touched off with microscopic movements with your toes on each foot at the same time. It is way too much for any person to keep track of, and it's insane to think that anyone could possibly do it, except we do. Now, not as many people drive a stick shift as used to, but anyone who wants to learn can learn to drive a stick shift in a few days. And the thing you learn with driving a stick shift is that the last thing you want to do is think about it. You don't have enough processing power in your forebrain where your conscious thought takes place. You have to learn to let it go and hand it over to your autonomic nervous system, which has vastly more computing power than the part of you that feels like you does. The part of you that feels like you performs a very specific sort of deliberate computation, and it's not the kind that's well suited to massively parallel tasks. Writing is a massively parallel task. All these things you list, they're all very important. And trying to do them all at once is going to get you so tangled up in your own strings that you fall apart like a bad marionette. So, here's what you want to do. We'll deal with sparkle at the very end of this. You've got your checklist. Each of those items on the checklist is a separate skill that you have to learn. So what you want to do is you want to write stories that force you to concentrate on one aspect of that checklist. And as you're writing that story, the only thing you're worried about, you're going to tell the rest of the story, but the only thing you're really worried about as a creator is getting that aspect to be as good as you possibly can. And every time you do that with a story, the aspect that you are actively practicing will get better. Even if the story winds up being no good, by whoever's standards, you'll get better at that particular aspect. And just like driving a stick shift, or throwing a ball, or riding a bicycle, or riding a skateboard, or walking, the more that you practice it, the easier it is for it to slip back into your autonomic nervous system and be part of the toolkit that you bring to the table that you can call on without any conscious, deliberate thought. This means that if you're early in the process of making your bones, you're going to have to let go of the notion that you can make all of these things work at the same time in the same story from word one. You're probably not going to be able to do that. But here's the thing. If you try to do all that intentionally, you're probably not going to be able to do it anyway, because you don't know how to do any of those things good enough to do them all on purpose, and you will get to the end and hate it. So the mentality that you're describing, the attempt to handcraft everything and force it to be perfect, is the beginner's understanding of what a master craftsman in any discipline does. The beginner looks at what a master craftsman has done, or watches them in action, and notices how much care they take on this little aspect of the culture, or how much finesse they have with that particular sort of inflection of the bow on the violin, or how beautifully they hold a corner on a high-speed track. And we'll think, oh, how do they do that? How do they keep all of that stuff in mind? The reality is that they don't. They've learned how to do these things by feel, through virtue of practicing and practicing and practicing a lot. Generally speaking, most writers, for the first 1,000,000 words, not a lot of what you write is going to be stuff that you're proud of in 30 years. For some writers, nothing you write will be stuff you can be proud of because it's so very hard to distance yourself from your work. But for the first 1,000,000 words, you just gotta assume that it's just practice, and after that it's practice and performance at the same time. Like the way the Beatles practiced in the nightclub for years and years and years. They were all performances, but it took them years of practicing in the nightclub before they went up and did arena tours. They were still selling tickets. They were still playing to the public. They were still selling tickets and playing to the public in high school when they were crap. And then they became the biggest band in the world by just practicing and performing, usually at the same time, over and over again, trying different things with each song, with each performance, and letting the skills soak into their bones. Now, all that said, some of the items on your checklist are ones that you really want to let go of and not worry about, like no adverbs. Stephen King says don't use adverbs when you write, but pick up any one of his books, read a few pages, you'll find adverbs. He doesn't overuse them to death like some writers do, like new writers are prone to do, but he uses them. He tells people not to use them as an exercise, because using them without learning any other skills can create a long-term weakness in your writing. It's a good idea to try to use as few as possible, particularly when you're doing an intentional practice story or exercising, but making that a thing that can slow you down and stop you, not a good idea. Now, that leads us into the issue of voice. You want a voice that's sparkly and grabby, and you don't know how to get it. Well, you get it by practicing. You don't do it by crafting the words. Crafting the words to fit a specific meter and rhyme is something you do for very particular kinds of poetry and very particular kinds of literary fiction. You don't do it if you're storytelling. You just don't. You'll find as you acquire greater facility with the language that sparkle and voice will emerge naturally from what you're doing. And if you want exercises to practice doing that, then you can write stories to certain arbitrary rules, like today I'm going to write a story with the first-person point of view character of a Russian immigrant to the United States. Well, that has an implicit voice in it. People who are just learning English from Russian make very particular, predictable mistakes. They speak with a particular rhythm that's influenced by their mother tongue. So you can create a voice based on those almost musical rules that pushes you out of your normal comfort zone for speaking far enough that you can play with words in ways that you normally wouldn't. And that's really good practice. And exercises like that on particular stories are ways that you can help learn different aspects of your own voice so that they become second nature to you, and it will sparkle. The more practice you get at it, the more your voice will sparkle. Look at any writer, particularly if they're a writer who is foolish enough to have posted early stories online or to have republished early stories in later retrospective collections. And read their early stories versus their mid-career stories and their late stories, and you will see how their voice, the voice that you remember as being their voice, emerges over the course of their career as they get more practice. It's a natural byproduct of the work, and it will sparkle if you stick to it. It might never sparkle like your favorite writer's voice does, but that's because it's not their voice. It's your voice. And you won't ever be able to really see how well it sparkles or doesn't. You're going to have to trust your audience for that. Now, to back off one step before I finish here, with regards to all of this stuff, the sparkly voice and the checklist and all of this, a thing that beginning writers do, and I was no exception, is trying to do all of this as a basket deliberate exercise like I was talking about earlier, in multiple drafts or through multiple revision passes or just through every time you get done with a page, going through the checklist and saying, did I do these things in the checklist? Because we think that's going to be a shortcut to being able to do it naturally later on. It's not, because you're not having focused, engaged practice. Practice hones a skill only when it's focused. Doing something isn't practice. Doing something with focus, that's practice. It's focus, not deliberation, not criticality, but focus that is the key to improving in any discipline in life. At any skill, at any art, you want to practice your tools with a laser-thin focus. Focus on one thing at a time. Don't try to focus on a basket of things, because even if you succeed in making that one piece maybe an inch or two better than it would otherwise have been, you will not retain much of what you learned in the process, because your focus was scattered. Focus is everything in this game. And if you want to improve on those things, focus on one per story. Every time you start a new story, whether it's a novel or a short story or a flash piece, pick something you're going to work on. Cliffhangering this novel, character dynamics that novel, individual character voices the next novel. Whatever you're feeling weakest in, make that the thing that you're going to work on in your next story. Do that enough, and you're going to have a master's level understanding of every tool at your disposal, and you'll be able to pick them up and use them with very little effort in a way that makes your readers and the next generation of people that come after you look at what you're doing and say, how do they do that? And then you'll really know that you've learned a few things. Thanks for the question. Please be sure to send in any other questions you have, because that's how this cast keeps going, and I'll see you tomorrow. NaNoWriMo Every Month is written and presented by J. Daniel Sawyer and produced by Artistic Whispers Productions. Visit our website at NaNoWriMoEveryMonth.com and leave a tip in the tip jar to support this podcast. NaNoWriMo Every Month is copyright 2015 by J. Daniel Sawyer and Artistic Whispers Productions and released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivatives license.